If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal from the ones who were supposed to be in your corner, or if you know the satisfaction of turning the tables when everyone has counted you out, then do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about justice being served. You're going to want to see how this one ends. It all started with the smell of burnt coffee and the low, comforting hum of a server rack in my tiny one-bedroom apartment. That was the scent of creation. For the first 3 years of Nexus Innovations, that was my entire world. I was 23 when I had the idea, a revolutionary logistics optimization software that could streamline supply chains for mid-sized manufacturers. It was a niche, unsexy corner of the tech world, but I saw the potential. I saw the inefficiency, the millions of dollars being wasted, and I knew I could build a better system. I poured everything I had into it. The small inheritance my grandmother left me, which my parents had strongly advised I use for a down payment on a sensible condo, was gone in the first 6 months. I cashed out my savings. I took on freelance coding jobs during the day so I could fund my own dream at night. I lived on instant noodles and cheap energy drinks. My social life withered, and my sleep schedule became a cruel joke. The bags under my eyes weren't just bags. They were designer luggage from all the trips I was taking into the lonely hours of the night, debugging code until the sun came up. My parents, they tried to be supportive in their own way. They'd call and say things like, "Are you sure about this, sweetie? It sounds awfully risky," or "Your cousin just got a promotion at the bank." Very stable. Every word of caution felt like a small, sharp pebble being tossed at the stained glass window of my ambition. But I didn't care. I was building something. Every line of code was a brick. Every solved bug was the mortar holding it together. And it worked. After a year of near solitude, I landed my first client. A local manufacturing firm that was hemorrhaging money. I remember walking into their boardroom, a 24-year-old woman in an ill-fitting blazer, my heart pounding a rhythm against my ribs that was pure terror and adrenaline. I laid out my pitch, my voice shaking at first, then steadying as I talked about what I knew, what I had built. They took a chance on me. 6 months later, my software had increased their efficiency by 30%. Word of mouth is a powerful thing in the B2B world. That first success story became my calling card. Within 2 years, Nexus Innovations was no longer a one-woman operation in a cramped apartment. We had a small, sleek office downtown. I had a team of 5 brilliant, dedicated people who believed in the mission. Liam, my lead developer, was a quiet genius who could make code sing. Sarah, our head of client relations, had a warmth and an intuition that could turn skeptical CEOs into our biggest champions. We were a small, tight-knit family. We celebrated wins with cheap pizza and champagne, and we weathered the losses together. I was 30 years old, and I was the founder and CEO of a 7-figure company that I had built with my own 2 hands. I was exhausted, but I was proud. The kind of deep, bone-weary pride that comes from creating something from nothing. That's when Daniel came home. My younger brother, Daniel, was and always had been the golden child. Where I was intense and focused, he was charming and effervescent. Where I saw problems to be solved with logic and hard work, he saw people to be won over with a smile and a well-timed story. My parents had scraped and saved to send him to a prestigious business school, an opportunity they'd never offered me. I'd worked my way through a state university, patching together scholarships and part-time jobs. For Daniel, they saw only a limitless future. He was the one they bragged about at dinner parties. I was the artsy computer geek daughter who was doing her own little thing. When he graduated with his MBA, the pressure started almost immediately. It began subtly, over our weekly Sunday dinners. "Clara, you're working so hard," my mother would say, passing me the roast potatoes. "You look tired." "It's a good tired, Mom," I'd reply, trying to keep my tone light. "We just landed the Axiom Corp account. It's huge for us." My father would chime in, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "That's wonderful, dear. But Axiom is big league. You need a real business mind to handle that kind of growth." Daniel just spent 2 years studying exactly these kinds of corporate scaling strategies. I could see it coming from a mile away. Daniel would just sit there, a picture of humility, nodding along. "I mean, Dad, Clara's done an incredible job. It's amazing, really. All self-taught." The words were a compliment, but the tone was pure condescension. Self-taught. As if it were a quaint hobby that had accidentally gotten out of hand. The campaign escalated. They weren't just suggesting he join. They were framing it as a necessity, a lifeline they were throwing me that I was too stubborn to grab. He has the pedigree, the connections. My dad argued one night on the phone. You built the engine, Clara, but Daniel knows how to drive the car. I fought it for a while. Dad, I have a team. We have a strategy. I know what I'm doing. Don't be so proud. My mother's voice would cut in on the extension. Family helps family. Why can't you see that we just want what's best for you and for the company? Eventually, I caved. Partly to get them off my back, but mostly because of a sliver of guilt they had so expertly lodged in my heart. Maybe they were right. I was a coder, a creator. I wasn't a slick, MBA-wielding executive. Maybe his polish was exactly what we needed to get to the next level. Maybe having family around would be nice. So I hired Daniel. I gave him the title of Chief Strategy Officer, a generous salary, and a corner office with a view. The first month was fine. He was full of energy, full of ideas. Some were even good. He suggested a rebranding campaign and a new marketing push that did, admittedly, bring in some fresh leads. He was a natural with people. He'd walk through the office, remembering everyone's name, asking about their weekend, making them laugh. He'd bring in donuts on Fridays. My team, seemed to love him. Sarah, in particular, was taken with his charm. He's just what we needed to shake things up, she told me over lunch one day. I smiled, but a knot of unease was already twisting in my stomach. I noticed how, in meetings, he would take one of my nascent ideas, rephrase it with a lot of slick business jargon, and present it as his own brilliant insight. To piggyback off Clara's initial thought, he'd begin, the real synergy is in leveraging our core competencies to create a more holistic, client-centric paradigm. The room would nod, impressed. I'd just sit there, watching my simple, practical idea get dressed up in a fancy suit and paraded around like a prize pony. He started making decisions without me. He'd approve marketing budgets that I hadn't seen. He'd have pre-meetings with key team members before the actual meetings, so by the time we all sat down together, a consensus had already been formed, and I was the outlier in my own company. When I tried to confront him, he'd turn on the charm, making me feel like I was being unreasonable and controlling. Whoa, Claire, relax, he'd say, leaning back in his chair, hands behind his head. I'm just trying to take some of the weight off your shoulders. You hired me to handle strategy, right? Well, this is strategy. He'd flash that winning smile, and the conversation would be over. My parents were ecstatic. Every phone call was a gushing review of Daniel's performance. Did you hear? Daniel closed that deal with Vertex. My dad would boom. I had spent 6 months cultivating that relationship. Daniel had just been there for the final signature. That business degree is really paying off. My mother would coo. They never asked about my contributions anymore. I was becoming a ghost in the machine I had built. The atmosphere in the office shifted. The easy camaraderie was replaced by a subtle tension. People didn't know who to report to. Liam, my loyal, brilliant Liam, would come into my office and close the door. Daniel promised the new client a feature by Q4 that would require us to rebuild the entire database architecture, he told me once, his face pale with stress. It's not possible without delaying our other commitments for at least 2 quarters. Did you approve this? I hadn't. I hadn't even been told. I stormed into Daniel's office, my hands shaking with fury. You can't make promises like that without talking to development. He didn't even look up from his computer. It's called ambitious goal setting, Clara. You have to be aggressive to scale. They taught us that on day 1 at business school. Don't worry, Liam's team will figure it out. They're smart guys. He dismissed my very real, very technical concerns with a wave of his hand, as if I were a hysterical child. I was losing control. The company felt less like my home and more like a house I was haunting, watching a new family move in and rearrange the furniture. The breaking point, the moment the floor fell out from under me, didn't happen in the office. It happened, as most family tragedies do, over a meal. It was another Sunday dinner. The air was thick with the smell of rosemary and my mother's smug satisfaction. She and my father exchanged a look, the kind of conspiratorial glance that precedes a firing squad. My father cleared his throat, tapping his fork against his wine glass. Clara, Daniel, your mother and I have been doing a lot of thinking. And we've spoken to some of the other investors. My blood went cold. The other investors were two of my parents' wealthy friends whom I'd reluctantly brought on for a small seed round years ago, a decision I was now beginning to regret. They held a minority stake, but their influence was tied to my parents. Nexus Innovations has grown beyond all our expectations, he continued, beaming. And that's thanks to your hard work, Clara. You built a wonderful foundation. Here it comes, I thought. But, he said, we all agree that for the next phase of growth, the company needs a different kind of leadership. It needs a CEO with formal business training, a strategic mindset for the global market. I stared at him, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. I could feel Daniel's eyes on me from across the table. He wasn't looking smug. He was looking expectant. He knew this was coming. My mother reached across the table and placed her soft, manicured hand on mine. Her touch felt like ice. Sweetie, what you've done is a miracle. But it's time to pass the torch. We think it's best for the company and for you if Daniel takes over as CEO. The room went silent. The only sound was the frantic, panic drumming in my ears. I looked from my mother's pitying face to my father's resolute expression, and finally to my brother. He sat there, in the chair he always sat in, at the table I'd eaten at my whole life, and he just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. They were taking it. They were taking my company, my life's work, my blood, my sweat, my sleepless nights, my sacrificed youth. They were taking it all, and they were trying to hand it to him on a silver platter, right here, between the mashed potatoes and the gravy. No, I whispered. The word felt foreign in my mouth. Clara, be reasonable, my father said, his voice hardening. This is a business decision. My business, I said, my voice rising, shaking. I built it. Every client, every line of code, every dollar in that bank account is because of me. Don't be so dramatic, my mother sighed, withdrawing her hand. We are the majority shareholders, when you count our friends. We can make this decision. We just wanted to do it, as a family. The word family hung in the air, grotesque and twisted. This wasn't family. This was a coup. A betrayal so deep and so absolute it stole the air from my lungs. I looked at Daniel, really looked at him, and saw the truth. He hadn't just been charming the staff. He'd been lobbying my parents, lobbying the investors, convincing them all that I was just the stepping stone, and he was the destination. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Their faces were a blur of shock and disapproval. They had expected me to cry, to argue, and then, ultimately, to accept my fate. They expected me to step aside gracefully. They had no idea who I was. They had forgotten what it takes to build an empire from nothing. It takes grit. It takes fire. And right then, in the smoldering ruins of my trust, a new kind of fire was being lit. I walked out of that house, the familiar scent of my mother's cooking choking me, and I didn't say another word. I got in my car, and as I drove away, I didn't look back. I knew I couldn't fight them head-on. They had the votes. They had the power. But I had something more important. I had the knowledge. They were trying to steal the kingdom, but they had no idea I was the only one who knew how to work the plumbing, the electricity, and where all the secret passages were. They thought the war was over. In reality, it had just begun. The days that followed that disastrous dinner were a special kind of hell. It was a Cold War fought in the hushed tones of corporate corridors and the sterile silence of my own mind at 3 a.m. I'd walk into the office I had picked out, with the furniture I had assembled myself on a long weekend with Liam, and it felt like walking into my own mausoleum. My presence was a stubborn, inconvenient ghost they were all waiting to see exorcised. My parents and Daniel didn't make the official announcement right away. They were trying to orchestrate a smooth transition. That was the phrase they used in the tense three-way phone call I was forced to endure the day after the dinner. Clara, we want this to be a win-win, my father said, his voice oozing a false, paternalistic reason. We'll give you a generous severance package. You can stay on as a consultant, if you like. A founder emeritus title. A title. A meaningless, ceremonial name to slap on my tombstone while they danced on my grave. I remember sitting in my car in the office parking lot, the phone pressed hard against my ear, just listening to the sheer audacity of it. The hum of my own engine was the only thing that felt real. There is no version of this where I step down and hand my company to Daniel, I said, my voice dangerously calm. You will have to fire me. There was a sharp intake of breath from my mother. Don't be so difficult, Clara. Why must you always make things so unpleasant? This is for the best. Daniel has a vision. His vision. I'd seen his vision. It was a PowerPoint presentation full of buzzwords and stock photos of diverse, smiling professionals in a boardroom. My vision was the server log at 2 a.m. showing that our uptime was 99.999%. My vision was the handwritten thank you note from our first client that I still had pinned to the corkboard above my desk. The apathetic cruelty of their logic was staggering. They had convinced themselves this was a sound business decision, completely divorcing it from the emotional and moral reality that they were gutting their own daughter. In their minds, they were sophisticated business people making a tough call. In my mind, they were thieves. In the office, the change was palpable. Daniel, emboldened by the secret coup, began to act as if he were already CEO. He called an all-hands meeting that I was only CC'd on 15 minutes before it started. I walked in and saw him standing at the front of the room, my room, using the projector I had bought. He was outlining a new Q4 strategic push, which was a vague, jargon-filled roadmap that promised exponential growth without a single concrete detail on how we would achieve it. He didn't acknowledge me. I stood at the back, leaning against the wall, my arms crossed. I watched the faces of my team. Some, like the newer marketing hires Daniel had brought in, looked at him with rapt attention. They were captivated by his smooth, confident delivery. But I also saw the others. I saw Liam, staring at his shoes, his jaw tight. I saw Sarah, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes for the first time. She caught my gaze for a split second, a look of, was it pity? Guilt? I couldn't tell before she quickly looked away. That hurt more than anything. My attempts to fight back were clumsy and futile. I was operating in a system that was now rigged against me. I tried to challenge Daniel's new strategic direction in a board meeting with our minority investors. I came prepared with data, with charts showing our steady, sustainable growth, and projections that showed the immense risks of Daniel's proposed, aggressive expansion. It was a disaster. Daniel, prepped by our parents, painted me as resistant to change, as being stuck in the startup phase. Clara's caution is what got us here, and we're all grateful for that, he said, his voice smooth as silk. But caution doesn't get you to $1 billion valuation. We need to be bold. We need to be disruptive. Our parents' friends, the investors, nodded along, their eyes glazed over with the allure of a quick, massive return. My father sat at the head of the table, beaming at Daniel. I felt my face flush with a hot, impotent rage. My data was meaningless. My experience was irrelevant. I was the cautious, emotional woman, and he was the bold, visionary man. It was a story as old as time, and it was playing out right there, in the conference room that was supposed to be my sanctuary. The nights were the worst. I'd go home to my empty apartment, the same apartment where I had built Nexus from nothing, and the silence would be deafening. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every condescending remark, every pitying glance. The sense of injustice was a physical weight, a crushing pressure on my chest that made it hard to breathe. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. My mind would race, caught in a loop of what-ifs and how-could-theys. How could my own parents, who had seen my struggle, who had seen my sacrifice, do this to me? How could Daniel, my own brother, who I had played with as a child, be so utterly ruthless? I started to doubt myself. Was I really being too cautious? Had I lost my edge? Was I holding the company back? Their gaslighting was a slow-acting poison, seeping into the cracks of my exhaustion. I felt small, powerless. I remember one night I was working late, trying to fix a critical bug that had emerged in our system, a direct result of Daniel's team pushing an update without proper testing. I was alone in the office, the only light coming from my monitor. I felt a wave of despair, so profound it almost brought me to my knees. I put my head in my hands, the cold surface of the desk a stark contrast to my burning cheeks, and I cried. Not loud, sobbing cries, but silent, hot tears of pure frustration and grief. Grief for the company I was losing, and for the family I now realized I had never truly had. That was my lowest point. Sitting there in the dark, a stranger in my own life. But then something shifted. As I was wiping my tears, my eyes fell on the whiteboard across the room. On it were the architectural diagrams for our next-generation software platform, codenamed Odyssey. It was my passion project, the future of the company. It was a design so elegant, so powerful, it would make our current software look like a child's toy. I had been working on it in secret for months. No one knew the full scope of it except me. Not Liam, not Daniel, and certainly not my parents. Staring at those complex, beautiful diagrams, a different feeling began to replace the despair. It was a cold, hard ember of anger. My anger. They wanted the company? Fine. They could have the building. They could have the name. They could have the brand that I had built. But the soul of the company, the future, that was mine. It had always been mine. It lived inside my head. The tears stopped. My breathing steadied. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard. I picked up a dry erase marker, my hand steady. I looked at the name Odyssey, my journey. With a decisive stroke, I wiped it clean. Not because I was abandoning it, but because it deserved a new home. A safe home. A home they could never touch. Then my phone buzzed on the desk. It was an email notification. The subject line read, Official Transition Plan and Timeline. It was from my father. They were making their move. They thought they had me cornered. They thought the game was over. A strange, unfamiliar smile touched my lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was all sharp edges and cold resolve. They had spent weeks making me feel powerless, like a victim of circumstance. But in that moment, I realized something critical. The victim is the one things happen to. I was about to become the one who makes things happen. The war wasn't over. I wasn't surrendering. I was just changing the battlefield to one of my own choosing. And on this new battlefield, I would be the one writing all the rules. The decision to act was like a switch flipping in my brain. The fog of grief and powerlessness burned away, replaced by a crystalline, cold clarity. For weeks, I had been reacting to their moves, playing defense on a field they controlled. No more. From now on, every move would be mine. Every action would be deliberate. I would not be the ghost in their machine. I would be the ghost in my machine, dismantling it from the inside out while they planned their coronation party. The first step was knowledge. I needed to understand my legal position down to the letter. I spent 2 sleepless nights researching corporate lawyers, looking for a shark. I found one. Her name was Anya Sharma, a woman with a reputation for being surgically precise and utterly ruthless in corporate litigation. Her website was minimalist and intimidating. Her hourly rate made my eyes water, but I knew she was a necessary investment. Our first meeting was in her stark, modern office overlooking the city. The entire room was shades of gray, black, and white. Anya herself was dressed in a razor-sharp black suit, her hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to accentuate the intensity in her eyes. She listened to my entire story without interruption, her fingers steepled under her chin. She didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. When I was done, she was silent for a long moment, her eyes boring into me. Your operating agreement, she said finally, her voice crisp. What does it say about intellectual property and non-competes? I had anticipated this. I slid the document across the polished concrete table. IP developed by employees belongs to the company. Standard non-compete for 12 months, but it's geographically limited and scope-specific. Anya scanned the pages, her eyes moving with terrifying speed. The IP clause is your main problem. You can't just take the existing code for Nexus Innovations and use it in a new venture. That's corporate theft, and they would sue you into oblivion. She paused, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the table. However, concepts, ideas, architectural designs, and industry knowledge that exist in your head, that is much harder to litigate. The execution must be entirely new. A clean build. Can you do that? I can do better, I said, a surge of confidence flowing through me. The current platform is good. What I have planned is 10 times better. It's based on the same principles, but the architecture is fundamentally different. It's a complete rewrite from the ground up. Anya's lips curved into the barest hint of a smile. Good. As for the clients and employees' non-solicitation clauses, we don't have them, I admitted. We were small. We were a family. I never thought. You never thought family would gut you like a fish, she finished for me, her tone devoid of judgment. That naivete ends today. The lack of non-solicitation is an opening. A big one. We can use that. I left her office with a clear, actionable plan. It was terrifying and exhilarating. The plan had 3 core pillars: the new entity, the team, and the clients. All 3 had to be secured in absolute secrecy before I made my move. Pillar 1, the new entity. Anya handled the legal framework. We incorporated Apex Dynamics in a neighboring state to avoid immediate detection. New bank accounts were opened with my personal, non-company funds. I rented a small, anonymous server space from a third-party provider, paid for with a personal credit card. Late at night, after leaving the Nexus office, I would go home and begin the real work. I started coding the foundation of the new platform, the one I had wiped from the whiteboard. The late nights returned, but this time they were not fueled by despair, but by a cold, thrilling rage. Every line of elegant, efficient code I wrote for Apex was a nail in Nexus's coffin. It was my work, my mind, my creation. Unassailable. Pillar 2, the team. This was the most dangerous part. I needed my best people, but one wrong move, one person who felt more loyalty to Daniel or the paycheck than to me, and the entire plan would implode. I had to start with the one person I knew I could trust implicitly, Liam. I asked him to meet me for a beer at a dive bar on the outskirts of town, a place no one from our office would ever go. The place smelled of stale beer and regret. We sat in a dark, worn-out booth. Liam looked exhausted, the stress of Daniel's impossible demands etched onto his face. How are you holding up? I asked, my voice low. He gave a hollow laugh. Daniel wants us to blue sky an AI integration. He doesn't know what it means, but he read it in an article. We're running on fumes, Clara. The passion is gone. It's just a job now. I took a deep breath. Liam, I'm going to tell you something. And if you repeat it, I'm finished. But I have to take that risk. I laid it all out. The hostile takeover. My parents' betrayal. The creation of Apex Dynamics. I didn't just tell him about the plan. I showed him. I opened my laptop and showed him the foundational code for the new platform. I explained the new architecture, the efficiency, the potential. I wasn't just offering him a job. I was offering him a return to what we once were, a small, agile team building something brilliant. His eyes, which had been dull and tired, slowly lit up as he scanned the code. He saw the elegance of it, the power. Clara, this is what you were sketching out 6 months ago. This is Odyssey. Odyssey is dead, I said softly. This is something new, and I can't build it alone. I slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a formal offer letter for the position of Chief Technology Officer at Apex Dynamics, with a significant salary increase and, more importantly, a substantial equity stake. I'm not offering you a job, Liam. I'm offering you a partnership. A chance to build something that is partly yours. He stared at the paper, then back at me. I could see the war in his eyes, the fear of risk versus the promise of creation. He was quiet for a full minute. They're destroying everything we built, he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. When do we start? A wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy washed over me. With Liam on board, I knew it was possible. He was the key. He discreetly sounded out the other 2 senior developers on our team, the ones who were most disillusioned with Daniel's management style. One by one, in secret meetings in coffee shops and quiet parks, I brought them into the fold. I offered them ownership, respect, and a mission they could believe in. By the end of the month, the core of my new development team was secure. They were still working at Nexus, but their hearts and minds were already at Apex. Pillar 3. The The clients. This was the final, most delicate piece of the puzzle. I had built personal relationships with every single one of our major clients. They knew me. They trusted me. Daniel had been trying to take over those relationships, but his smooth talk couldn't replace the years of trust one had built by personally answering his calls at 10 p.m. to fix a server issue. Sarah was my entry point. Her disillusionment had been growing. Daniel had recently lost a promising new lead by being arrogant and dismissive of their technical team's concerns. Sarah had to clean up the mess. I found my moment during a company-sponsored happy hour. Daniel was holding court, laughing loudly, while Sarah stood off to the side, nursing a drink and looking miserable. I walked up to her. "He's a lot, isn't he?" I said quietly. She jumped, startled. She gave me a wary look. "Clara." You don't have to say anything," I interrupted gently. "I know you're in a tough position. But I also know you care about our clients more than anyone." I told her I was leaving to start a new, more focused consultancy. I didn't mention taking anyone with me. I just framed it as my own personal next step. "I just wanted to let you know," I said, "so you're not blindsided." Then I looked her in the eye. "Those clients deserve the best. I hope they get it." I let the implication hang in the air and walked away. 2 days later, she asked me to lunch. "Your new consultancy," she said, picking at her salad. "What's the focus?" I told her. "The same as Nexus, but better, faster, more advanced." She listened, her intelligence and ambition sparking in her eyes. "The Axiom Corp contract is up for renewal in 2 months," she said, almost to herself. "They're not happy with Daniel's new account manager." That was all I needed. I didn't have to poach anyone. I just had to present a better option. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I worked in the shadows. She would give me the temperature of our key accounts. I would prepare proposals under the Apex Dynamics letterhead. I had quiet lunches and discreet phone calls. I never once badmouthed Nexus. I didn't have to. I simply sold the future. "Nexus is going in a new strategic direction," I'd say calmly. "I'm launching a new firm that's going back to the core principles of what made us successful in the first place: cutting-edge tech and obsessive client support." I was offering them a lifeline, a return to the service and innovation they had originally signed up for. The pieces were clicking into place. There were close calls. One afternoon, Daniel walked by my desk while I had a window open with the Apex Dynamics bank account statement. I managed to minimize it just in time, my heart hammering against my ribs. Another time my mother called, her voice dripping with suspicion. "You've been very quiet lately, Clara. Are you finally coming to your senses about the transition?" "Just focusing on my work, Mom," I said, my voice a perfect mask of weary resignation. "Making sure everything is stable for the handover." The lie tasted like ash, but it was a necessary poison. The handover they were planning was a joke. The official date was set for a company-wide town hall in 2 weeks, on a Friday. They were going to announce Daniel as the new CEO and me as the departing founder who was moving on to pursue new challenges. They were writing the final chapter of my story. Little did they know, I was about to publish a whole new book. Everything was ready. The new company was legally formed and funded. My key team had signed their offer letters, postdated for the Monday after my resignation. And I had verbal, off-the-record commitments from clients representing 80% of Nexus's annual revenue that they would be signing service agreements with Apex Dynamics the moment they were clear of their current contracts. The dominoes were lined up, a perfect, beautiful, deadly row. I had spent a month living a double life, a ghost in my own company, fueled by coffee and a righteous fury. Now, all that was left to do was to give that first domino a gentle, deliberate push. And I had chosen the perfect moment to do it. Not their town hall. Not on their terms. But the day before, in a way they would never see coming. Thursday. The day before my public execution. The air in the Nexus office was thick with a strange, manufactured cheerfulness. Daniel had ordered a catered lunch for everyone, a gesture of goodwill from the incoming king. He walked around, clapping people on the back, his smile a blindingly white, predatory thing. My parents were scheduled to come in for the big town hall the next day. They probably imagined a triumphant ceremony, a passing of the scepter. I spent the morning in my office with the door closed, methodically deleting personal files from my computer and packing a small, unassuming box with a few mementos. The framed photo of my first small team, the corkboard with the thank you note, a ridiculous mug that said, "World's okayest coder." At 2 p.m., I sent a single email to my father, my mother, and Daniel. The subject line was simple: meeting. The body was even simpler: my office. 3 p.m. I didn't wait for a response. I walked out to Liam's desk. He, along with the two other developers who were coming with me, looked up, their faces tense. I gave them a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was the signal. They began quietly executing the final phase of our digital transition plan, revoking their own high-level access permissions to the Nexus servers, but not before ensuring all client-facing functions would remain stable for the next 72 hours. We were not saboteurs. We were professionals. We would not hurt the clients by leaving a burning wreck behind. We would simply leave behind an empty, hollowed-out shell. At 2:55 p.m., my family arrived. They walked into my office together, a united front. My father looked stern, my mother looked nervous, and Daniel looked insufferably smug. He thought this meeting was me, finally waving the white flag, ready to negotiate the terms of my surrender. "Clara," my father started, taking the seat opposite my desk as if it were his own. "I'm glad you've decided to be reasonable about this. Tomorrow is a big day, and we want it to go smoothly." I let him finish. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. The silence stretched. I looked at each of them, one by one, engraving their faces into my memory at this exact moment, the moment before their world shattered. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," I said, my voice even and devoid of all emotion. "I didn't call this meeting to discuss the transition. I called it to tender my resignation." I slid 3 copies of my resignation letter across the polished surface of the desk. They were simple, direct, and effective immediately. My father stared at the letter as if it were a snake. "Don't be ridiculous, Clara. You can't resign. We're restructuring." "You can't restructure a person," I replied calmly. "You can only fire them. But I'm taking that option off the table. I quit." Daniel laughed. It was a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Fine. Quit. It just makes tomorrow easier. A little dramatic for my taste, sis. But hey, you do you." He gestured around the office. "The company will be fine." And that was my cue. The moment I had been replaying in my mind for weeks. "What company, Daniel?" I asked, my voice dropping into a lower register. "Are you talking about the company whose top 3 senior developers just submitted their resignations 10 minutes ago?" Liam chose that exact moment to walk past my glass-walled office, carrying a small box of his own things. He didn't look in. He just kept walking toward the exit. Daniel's eyes followed him, his smug smile faltering for the first time. "Are you talking about the company?" I continued, my gaze locking onto his, "whose head of client relations is also leaving?" Funny thing, Sarah decided she wanted to take on a new challenge as well. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "You can't do that." "Oh, I'm not doing anything," I said, spreading my hands. "People are free to choose where they work. And it seems they don't want to work here anymore. They'd rather work for a company that values them. A company like, say, Apex Dynamics." I let the name hang in the air. My father's face went from confusion to a dawning, horrified comprehension. "That's my new company," I explained as if to a child. "I started it about a month ago. We specialize in next-generation logistics optimization. In fact, our platform is so advanced that a few of our first clients are coming from our old network. Axiom Corp, for instance. They signed with us this morning. So did Vertex. And Omni Global. All told, about 80% of Nexus's projected Q4 revenue." The color drained from Daniel's face. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He was stammering, searching for words. You stole our clients. That's illegal. Is it?" I tilted my head. "I had my lawyer, a very good one, look over our contracts. There are no non-solicitation clauses. And I didn't steal anything. I simply offered a superior service, and they made a sound business decision to come with the founder they trust and the development team that actually built the product. You're left with a brand, a handful of junior employees, and clients whose contracts are about to expire. So I ask you again, what company are we talking about? My father stood up, his face purple with rage. You ungrateful child. After everything we've done for you, everything you've done for me? My voice finally cracked, not with sadness, but with the sheer white-hot force of my fury, unleashed at last. You tried to steal my life's work out from under me and give it to your favorite son because you never, not for 1 second, believed I was good enough on my own. You didn't do this for the good of the company. You did this out of your own pathetic, blinding pride. You did this because you couldn't stand that I built this, not him. I stood up then, my hands flat on the desk. I looked directly at Daniel, whose charm had utterly evaporated, leaving behind the pale, frightened face of a boy who had been caught cheating. You wanted to be CEO? Congratulations, I said, my voice dripping with ice. You are now the chief executive officer of an empty building, a dwindling bank account, and a legacy of failure. I hope your MBA taught you how to manage that. I picked up my small box. I walked around the desk, toward the door. My mother was openly weeping now, not for me, but for the mess, for the family drama. Clara, please, she whispered. Don't do this to us. To your family. I stopped and looked at her, and for the first time I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just a vast, empty distance. You did this to us, I said softly. When you chose him over me, you made your decision. Now I've made mine. I walked out of my office and didn't look back. I walked through the main workspace, which was now buzzing with confused whispers. Liam and the others were waiting for me by the elevator. As the doors slid open, I saw Sarah standing there, her own box in her hands. She met my eyes and gave me a small, firm nod. A nod of solidarity. A new beginning. As the elevator doors closed, sealing me off from the life I had built and the family who had betrayed me, I didn't feel triumph. Not yet. I just felt quiet. The crushing weight that had been on my chest for months was gone. I could breathe again. Resolution and reflection. The fallout was, as my lawyer Anya would later say, spectacularly comprehensive. My family and the remaining investors tried to fight. They sent threatening legal letters. They accused me of everything from corporate espionage to theft of trade secrets. As a fortress, we had done everything by the book. The code for Apex was entirely new. The employees had resigned of their own free will. The clients had terminated their contracts with Nexus legally and signed new ones with us. Their blustering and threats amounted to nothing but expensive legal bills for them. Within 6 months, Nexus Innovations was dead. They couldn't secure new clients without a viable product or a reputable team. They tried to hire new developers, but the word was out in the tech community. The company was a sinking ship with a toxic captain. They eventually sold off the office furniture and the company name for pennies on the dollar to a competitor. Apex Dynamics, on the other hand, flourished. Freed from the dead weight of Daniel's ambition and my parents' interference, we were faster, more innovative, and more focused than ever. The team I brought with me formed the core of a new, healthier culture built on respect and shared ownership. Within 2 years, we had surpassed every financial milestone Nexus had ever achieved. We were profitable, we were growing, and we were respected. Our new office was bright and filled with laughter and the frantic, happy clatter of keyboards. It was a home. A real one. I never spoke to my parents or my brother again. They tried to reach out a few times in the first year, voicemails full of crocodile tears and recriminations. But the trust was not just broken. It had been atomized. There was nothing left to rebuild. I mourn the idea of the family I thought I had, but I don't miss the reality of who they were. Sometimes late at night, when I'm the last one to leave the Apex office, I stand and look out the window at the city lights. I don't feel anger anymore. That fire has cooled into a quiet, solid core of self-reliance. They tried to take my creation, so I created something better. They tried to steal my future, so I built a new one they could never touch. They thought my success was a resource they could allocate as they saw fit. They learned the hard way that you cannot take the fire from a star. All you can do is get burned when it goes supernova. Blood may be thicker than water, but for me, the bonds I forged in loyalty, respect, and shared creation with my new team, my real family, are thicker than blood. And that is a foundation that no one can ever take away. Betrayal can feel like an ending, but sometimes it's the violent, painful beginning of who you were always meant to be. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who might need to hear it. And for more stories of justice and hard-won victory, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Let me know in the comments below, what's the most important thing to you when it comes to loyalty? Until next time, remember to build your own castles, because you should always be the one who holds the keys.